Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk about a few things. There are one or two really quite interesting stories that I've spotted in the press this week. Apart from the budget, which I'm not going to comment on because all the world and his wife is talking about it, and clearly it's just a rather pathetic attempt to persuade people that taxes are coming down by cutting a couple of p off NHI. It's really not worth wasting any breath on, I don't think. The first story that I came across this week was about Rwanda. Now, the National Audit Office now reckons that it's going to cost £500 million to send 300 people to Rwanda. That's 1.7 million per person. Now, at a time with this fantastic cost of living crisis we've got and the shortage of money almost everywhere, to spend £1.7 million per person to send 300 people to Rwanda in a pathetic and useless and pointless attempt to try and stop little boats crossing the channel is madness. It's just another example of Sunak's almost unlimited capacity for misjudging things. It's a project he's been obsessed with for months and months, for almost a year now, and it's never going to work. And funnily enough, since this scheme was first announced, 21 Rwandans have come to the UK seeking asylum, have been given asylum because they feel unsafe in their own country. And this is the country that the House of Commons has said it is safe, and yet we're giving asylum to people who say they're not safe there. At the same time, it was also announced this week that the Biby Stockholm, this is that prison ship that belongs to a company in Brisbane, Australia, the other side of the world, that's costing £41,000 a day. And that works out at about £205 per person. And we were told that we had to have the Biby Stockholm was going to be cheaper than the hotels that only cost £140 a day. And we all know the hotels are a complete and utter rip-off because you're getting perhaps 4 people in a room. And it's costing £140 a day. It's £560 per day for a room. Well, they're probably getting very rough food anyway. The whole thing is completely out of control, and largely because, of course, they're not processing applications. An interesting snippet I read somewhere this week about Liz Truss. She went, I've talked about this before, she went to a trip to Australia, and she insisted on going on a big plane. It cost £500,000. Actually, it didn't cost £500,000. I think it cost £454,000 to take this big plane to Australia. It took longer than a commercial flight, and had they gone first class, the 12 of them had gone first class, it would have been less than £100,000. But no, she wanted to go, she wanted to take a big plane with the Union Jacks on it. And the cost of catering on that plane, this is Truss and 12 senior civil servants, the cost of catering was £15,639. They were spending £1,400 per head. They must have been eating caviar and drinking Cristal champagne or something. I mean, how can you spend a trip to Australia and back, 2 meals there, 2 meals back, £1,400 per person? And some of these staff would have been very junior. I mean, it's just staggering that this woman is prepared to even show her face anywhere these days. It's just well, I've said what I think of her before, but incidentally, you might remember when she stayed at Chevening, she was given a bill for £12,000 for towels and bathrobes that were missing after she left. In other words, it's thought that she nicked them. And this is a woman who actually thinks. She's actually in America talking about running down the UK and saying nothing when Tommy Robinson is described as a hero. Another story this week, the Financial Times reported that the volume of physical goods traded by the UK fell 7.4%. That's a big fall. Between 2018, which was long before the pandemic, and 2023, which was long after the pandemic. In other words, you can't blame the pandemic. You can't blame the war in Ukraine. That's how much our trade has fallen. Now, you may know of Jim Ratcliffe. He's the guy who just bought a chunk of Manchester United. It was at one time he was the richest man in the UK. I think he was worth 30 billion or something. Anyway, he decided he didn't want to pay tax in the UK. He built his business here, but he didn't want to stay here and pay taxes. No, so he went off to live in Monaco, and several of his senior colleagues went off with him as well. And that's where he's based now. And he's decided to build a plastics factory in Belgium. And well, the British government is going to help him. They're going to guarantee up to £600 million of finance for this factory in Belgium, which will produce plastic and will employ Belgians. No British people were employed there. And you have to wonder, I mean, this is just beyond madness. When you look at the state that we're in, how are we giving a billionaire a help to start a business in another country? It's absolutely, utterly insane. Now, when you make these videos, you've got to be a bit careful not to make any predictions. I mean, I do occasionally, and fortunately until now, I think most of what I predicted has come right. But one thing I did predict some time ago was that because of the damage to the economy, and because that we're in decline now, and in a decline which is at the moment irreversible and will be until we rejoin the EU, I said that a lot of people are going to find it difficult to pay their mortgages, pay their rent and so on. There are going to be a lot of people being evicted and so on. And I did say also that in the way that they have with water, gas, electricity, with the railways and with almost everything else, that big foreign investors are going to move in and start buying houses and renting them back to us. I had in mind the Chinese at the time when I first said it, which was probably a couple of years ago. It seemed to be obvious it was going to happen. And an article in the newspaper I saw last week, and I'd like to read a little bit to you because it's quite interesting. It says the following: build-to-rent investors around the world view Britain's housing market as an opportunity because many are priced out of home ownership. There is a shortage of social housing and rental costs are high. Experts told the that private equity firms are more focused on large short-term profits than other types of landlords, which means they're more likely to maximise rents each year and skimp on maintenance, the worst possible type of landlord. Large institutional investors, often referred to as Wall Street mega-landlords, have increasingly expanded their focus from flats to family houses in the UK. Money pouring into the build-to-rent market hit 4.6 billion in 2023, having doubled since 2016. That's just 7 years. More than a third, 38% of investment, came from private equity firms. North American companies accounted for more than a third of the funding. The biggest single purchase last year was of 1,500 family houses across the UK by Leaf Living, which is backed by the US company Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm. See, it's happening. We're just selling everything. I made a video a few weeks ago about how so many of our big businesses, big retailers, big manufacturers, and big service providers and hotels and so on are all foreign-owned now. Everything's being sold off. And now, as I forecast, the foreigners are moving in, buy up our houses. I mean, where are we going to end up? I mean, how much worse can things get? And you're going to see people are going to be repossessed, the houses will be snapped up, be all snapped up at cheap prices, and then we'll be paying our rents to a firm in Albuquerque or in Beijing or something. It's absolutely crazy. But then the Labour Party's going to sort it out, aren't they? Johnathan Reynolds last week, he's the shadow business secretary. He was talking about managed divergence, and he said Labour is going to, his actual words were, will turn the UK into a more competitive and open economy. How do you do that, Johnathan? How do you do that? How do you make it more competitive? How can the government make it more competitive? Companies produce stuff and sell it. They provide services and they charge for them. How can you make them more competitive? They'll be as competitive as they possibly can. It's not the government's job to get involved in making a business more competitive. And how are you going to make the economy any more open? We are closed to the EU. No small or medium-sized firm can any longer trade with the EU. Or if they do so, it's very, very difficult and complicated, and we've got reluctant customers. and managed divergence. Let me tell you about managed divergence. Divergence is where your standards are different. This is one of the big reasons for Brexit was so that we could have our own standards. Like, we could go back to inches and feet and so on instead of having meters if we wanted to. I think Rees-Mogg wanted to do that. But anyway, you have your own standards. So if you've got a UK manufacturer, and until now, for 45 years, if you manufacturing goods, widgets that, say clockwise widgets that are yellow, and he's been selling them to the EU, because the standards in the EU are clockwise widgets with that are yellow. And suddenly you say, we're going to change that. We're going to make them red now. We're going to make them anti-clockwise. So you can't sell to the EU anymore, unless the customer in the EU or the EU actually change their regulations to match ours. They're not going to do that. Divergence offers no benefits whatsoever. It's a complete and utter nonsense. So let me tell you the main story that I want to talk about today, leading to the boy buying the £300,000 Rolls Royce. Most of this information has come from Richard Brooks, the very distinguished reporter for Private Eye, who's been working on this story for a very long time. Now, Freeports, if you don't know, they're areas which the government sets up where private enterprise is given rights over an area of land, often quite a big piece of land, usually bordering the sea, and within that area, the very, very loose controls, very little controls on what comes in, only supposed to be controls on what is going out of the Freeport, and they can pay lower wages. A lot of controls that other firms are subject to do not exist in Freeports. There's a lot of freedom. And this is something that Rishi Sunak is really, really keen on. He says this is one of the main benefits of Brexit. He keeps saying that the Freeports are one of the main benefits of Brexit. And like his Rwanda scheme and so much else, he couldn't be wrong. He couldn't be more wrong. Freeports are notorious for being places where people can commit as much crime as they like. It doesn't mean to say they always do, but there's an absence of accountability and scrutiny, and this benefits private firms. The government, local or central, get very little benefit out of it, and they're absolutely ripe for money laundering and smuggling, because very little control of what's coming in, what's going out, and all sorts of crime and tax evasion that has always been associated with Freeports, unless they're very tightly controlled. Of course, in this case, they're going to be very loosely controlled. And so it's been decided that we're going to have 12 of these Freeports. Now, in fact, we've had Freeports before. The first Freeports were set up under Margaret Thatcher, and they didn't seem to work out terribly well, and Cameron closed them all, the last one in 2012, or refused any further licences. So, they've already been proved to be a failure, but nonetheless, Sunak is absolutely determined that this is what we're going to do. Now, there are going to be 12 of them all over the country, and the most famous at the moment is the one at Teeside in the northeast. Now, this is the site of a huge steelworks, and it's also part of the local airport. It's quite a big area. I think it's 2,900 acres, I believe. Now, the steelworks belonged to a company from Thailand who bought it in 2010, but it went bust in 2016. So they went off and they left all the steelworks rusting away there, and so at some stage, under a guy called Ben Houchen, who's now quite famous, I think more for a laugh than any other reason, Boris Johnson put him in the House of Lords, so he's now Lord Houchen. He set up this thing called the South Tees Development Corporation, and the idea was to compulsory purchase the land and to develop it and make it into a big Freeport. Now he got involved with two guys. He got two guys, one called Chris Musgrave, another called Martin Corney, to take over running this, sort of help him with this new Freeport. And so they formed a company called Teesworks, and this was all arranged by Ben, and they seemed to be very, very very, very close. I think Corney and Musgrave of Teesworks, I think they've got a bit of a coloured history. I think one of them is the director of 66 companies, and I think there have been questions in the past, I think. Anyway, it was said, they decided that they'd tell everybody this land was really going to be very expensive to remediate and so on, and so they were given a 50-50. Corney and Musgrave were given 50% of it, and South Tees Development Corporation owned the other 50%. South Tees Development Corporation, using public money, spent £450 million remediating the site. Musgrave and Corney were then two things happened. One is that they were allowed to sell the scrap metal from the steelworks, which was an awful lot of scrap metal, from which they got £40 million, not having invested a penny. And then in March 2021, after complaining again about how this was going to be too expensive to do and so on, Musgrave and Corney were given another 40%. So they ended up owning 90% of this Freeport. And South Tees Development Corporation owned 10% only. And the further deal was that they didn't have to buy any of this land, they didn't have to pay for any of it, but they could buy any land because it was said to be just worthless. They could buy any land they wanted within this site for £1 an acre. And so, for example, they bought approximately 100 acres, one stage in 2022, I think it was, for £96. They then re-let that area. It was to be a factory for someone making blades for wind farms. They re-let it, having paid £96 for it. They re-let it for £4.3 million a year. They then sold that lease to a firm called Macquarie, their investment fund, for £75 million. They were then able to clear all the scrap metal from the steelworks, which brought them in £40 million. And so they'd made, getting on for £150 million without doing anything, without investing any money at all. Now, because of the Freeport, because they have goods coming in and so on, they wanted a key. So with Houchen's help and using the South Tees Development Corporation, they managed to raise £113 million in a loan from the government to build this quay. So they built the quay, or they're building the quay, and then it was sold across to Teesworks, who will be running it, and they will get all the profits from handling goods coming in and out. So they've got a complete stranglehold on it, and they've got all this mass 2,900 acres of land that they can buy at any time at £1 an acre. And so the money is just pouring in. I mean, as I say, £150 million, without investing a penny. They don't have to invest any money. And not only things like, for example, the South Tees Development Corporation, they needed some aggregates, and they were aggregates, they're like stones and pebbles they use making concrete. There was a whole load on the site. So they paid Teesworks, these two guys, they paid them £20 million. For some of the aggregate. So all they had to do was move the aggregate from one side of the site to another side of the site, and they got £20 million for that. And they've got involved in all these, they set up companies to have plant hire and building and all these sorts of things. And it's just been a whole racket about how you transfer money, public money, to slightly questionable characters. Now, obviously, if you're running a Freeport and the government is trusting you to declare whenever goods leave the port and how much they're leaving and so on, because the government's not controlling anything, you need really, really, really good security. And so these people have set up, again, keeping it all in the family, they've set up a security company. It's called NE Security Limited. And the guy who's the director of this, he's a guy called David Garside Jr., He's the son of another guy called David Garside Sr., who's a big pal of Chris Musgrave, one of the two partners in Teesworks. So David Garside Jr., he's going to be in charge of the security for this huge Freeport, where millions, maybe billions of goods are going to be passing through all the time, and where everything has to be controlled and so on. And an interesting thing about his CV is that he in 2015, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for running a massive drugs operation right the way across the north of England. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And so this is going on and on. There's a lot more scandal to it, but I don't want to bore you with all the details. But I mean, it just is they're just laughing. Now, this is getting a bit of publicity now. I mean, people are getting to know about it, and I'm sure people in the north of England must be getting quite cross because, I mean, this 150 million they've made so far, and they're going to make much, much more, is all money that should have gone to the residents or the taxpayers of the northeast, or maybe the Treasury in general. But, you know, these guys are just siphoning it off. And you know how when you do something wrong, you kind of want to lie low a bit and so on. You may remember in the film Goodfellas, when they robbed all the gold from the airport, and they agree to meet up afterwards, but they also agree that, you know, they'll lie low and not make a noise and so on. And they have this restaurant. One of the guys turns up in a big new pink Cadillac, and his wife's got a brand new mink coat and so on, and he's boasting about it. And the Robert De Niro character says, you know, this is crazy. You just shut up and lie low and pretends nothing's happening. And of course, this is what you would expect, or you would think would be intelligent for these characters, Musgrave and Corney and their families. But clearly, their son is, or it's actually it's Joe Musgrave. It's Chris Musgrave's son is clearly a very, very stupid boy. He's 27 years old. And of course now they've got all this money flooding again. I mean, between them, the two guys, they've got 75 million each so far, and they've got millions and tens and hundreds of millions to come in probably over the years, unless they're stopped. And so this lad to spend £300,000 is nothing, is it? I mean, that's pocket change. And so he's gone along to this showroom, and he's bought this car, and he's put it on the internet. He's put it on. Can you imagine it? With him standing in front, as you can see in the photograph, smiling away. They're looking in his £850 Dior sneakers, and with his personal number plate. And you think, how stupid is it possible to be? How is it that money can turn people's heads? You know, at least if they want to get away with this, they should at least lie low, at least, you know, buy some property, maybe buy a house in Florida or something. But to buy a car like that, so ostentatious, so flash, what is he going to do with that car in the northeast of England? I mean, people up there are starving. People, they can't feed their children. People are losing their jobs. People are desperate. People are losing their homes. People can't afford to put on the heating. And he's driving around a 300,000. Where's he going to park it? I don't think people are going to come and stand and admire it. I think very likely anybody walking past, an awful lot of people walking past are not going to be very happy. So, I mean, it's practically useless. It's like saying, look at all this money I've got, and look what I bought with it. Never mind where it came from. Aren't I clever? And I bet the women will all love me. And it's just so awful, and so stupid, so crooked, and but it's, you know, as I say, it's one of the great benefits of Brexit. And they do Brexit. Firms are not going to move to a Freeport. The idea is that firms will set up in a Freeport because they've got all this freedom and so on, and this will create a lot of new businesses. It won't. What it means is that people who are outside the Freeports, who've been paying their taxes and been controlled by HMRC and everything else, will now move into the Freeports so they don't get away with anything. It's just so desperate, as I say. It's desperate. It's, again, an example of what I described as Rishi Sunak's sort of infinite capacity for stupidity and misjudgment. The man is really, really clueless, but he's absolutely wedded to these things. And when there was a bit of fuss about it recently, a lot of questions being asked in Parliament and so on, Michael Gove, the Minister for Levelling Down, he set up an inquiry. But he set the parameters of the inquiry, and the inquiry was into what his department had done as much as anything and why they hadn't controlled it. And so, of course, the result of the inquiry was there's nothing wrong at all, nothing to see here, no, everything's fine. It's just like giving up. I mean, it's really, really impossible. I mean, do you really think these guys, and they've got a bit of a history, both of them, do you really think that they're going to obey the law and they're not going to try and find ways to make even more money for themselves at the expense of the public? But anyway, that's the story. It's, I think, extremely shocking and there you go. Yes, okay. Well, if you watched this far, thank you very much indeed, as always. If you haven't already subscribed, or if you know of anybody you think might be interested, once again, I'd be really grateful if you'd pass on my details. And so, until next time, thank you for watching, and bye for now.